Hello and welcome back with my first thoughts of the new Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr single "Home to Us." Was released today, a couple of hours ago. Listened to it 3 times now, and to my own surprise, I have to say, I was really moved by that song, and I really liked that song. And the more I listened to it from each of those 2 or 3 times when I listened to it, I liked it more and more, which is the same as with the first single from the Boys of Dungeon Lane album, The Days We Left Behind, which is also kind of a grower. At first, I wasn't too impressed with it, but with these two Paul McCartney songs, it's more than in the long. It's more about the lyrics than not than ever, but those are two of the most insightful, but also very different from each other. Lyrics of Paul McCartney in years, maybe since Chaos and Creation, The Backyard, which was the last time we got a kind of a somber Paul McCartney album. Not that Home to Us is a somber song, that's more The Days We Left Behind. Home to Us is more like the joyful pub sing-along kind of memory song. And I said, to my own surprise, I was impressed because only yesterday I talked with a friend of mine who's also a big McCartney and Beatle fan about the release of Home to Us, because yesterday we talked to each other and we were like, oh, tomorrow is the day when the Paul and Ringo song comes out, and he was really hopeful that it would be great, and I was more like the pessimist, and I was like, maybe it's one of those cheap nostalgia songs, like, every second Ringo Starr song for the past 30 years was this kind of cheap Beatle nostalgia and thinking of Liverpool kind of songs, and most of them are, let's face it, pretty bad. But most of those, or none of those, have been written by Paul McCartney, so that's maybe the thing that differentiates the Paul McCartney track with Ringo Starr as a special guest star from the Ringo Starr tracks. No, it's really a very sweet song, and the lyrics, like I said, the lyrics are good, and I'm now very optimistic for the new Paul McCartney album, which comes out in a couple of weeks, because I think this could be, I think that Flaming Pie and Chaos and Creation, The Backyards, are kind of related, and I think this could be like the third in this kind of trilogy, which could be like an unofficial McCartney 1, 2, 3 trilogy. There's McCartney 2, and there's McCartney 3, and then there's this other trilogy of also 3 albums where he's mostly the only musician on the tracks, with a couple of guest star appearances. And especially Home to Us, the sound aesthetic of it, the vibe reminded me a bit of Flaming Pie, but also, like I said, of Chaos and Creation. And I once ranked all Paul McCartney albums, and my 2 favorites from the 21st century were Chaos and Creation and Flaming Pie. I think I had Flaming Pie as my 9th favorite Paul McCartney album, and out of 30 that I ranked, and Chaos and Creation even as my 7th. So who knows, maybe this is like a top 10, top 15 Paul McCartney album. I mean after 2 songs, it's too early for me to judge it, but those first 2 songs, which deal both with this kind of Beatle Liverpool nostalgia, but both in a very tasteful way, with very mature, good lyrics. So I'm very positive. I'm also quite positive for the forthcoming Rolling Stones album, by the way. Again, like with Paul McCartney, both albums also produced by Andrew Watt, so lots of similarities. Like with Paul McCartney, there's 2 songs that have already been released in the past couple of days, In the Stars and Rough and Twisted, and I think I like both songs more than anything on Hackney Diamonds. They really took the time with Hackney Diamonds, like 20 years after Bigger Bang, and then it was, average at best, but maybe below average album. But these 2 songs, especially Rough and Twisted, really good. So I think if you'd asked a pop fan, a young pop fan in 1966, when the Beatles and the Stones were at their kind of climax, when you asked them, do you believe that 60 years from now the surviving members of those 2 groups will release in 2026, each will release an album, Ringo and Paul, are the surviving Beatles. So Home to Us is like the closest we can get to a Beatle track these days. And the surviving Stones are still the Rolling Stones. I don't think a teenager who's a fan of the Beatles and Stones in 1966 would have imagined that both would release something in 2026 and that it would still sound as good as that. I'm not going to say it's as good as the stuff they did in the 60s, especially 1966 with Revolver and Aftermath, but very, very good for more than 80-year-old people. So both Beatles and Stones, good days for Beatles and Stones fans these days. And I'm looking forward to both albums. Thank you very much for watching. Till next time. Goodbye.